Hello, everybody, and welcome to a very special Fight and Focus one-on-one. I'm Josh Shernoff, and today I have the honor and privilege to sit down with one of the greatest professional wrestlers today and possibly of all time, AEW star Bryan Danielson. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you for that great introduction.
Well, I try my best.
Yeah.
So we're recording this the day before you're going to be competing at the Liacouras Center for AEW Dynamite. That's in my neck of the woods, Philadelphia. Very excited to have you here. But one of the main things we want to talk about is AEW Plus on FITE. That's our international audience will be watching AEW right here on FITE with AEW Plus. So one of the things I wanted to jump right into was you have wrestled all over the world, but you're somebody who your style has definitely taken from various different parts of the world, different styles from different regions. What is it about wrestling for an international audience that you've always enjoyed so much?
Well, I think the coolest thing is that everywhere is different, right? As far as what a culture enjoys. And that's been one of my favorite things about wrestling is one, being able to go and experience these cultures, but two, learn the different styles and everything where that the culture enjoys. Like one of the things that I love, so I love going to Japan, where it's more like a sports-based style. Then I'd go to England and I'd be singing the American national anthem in front of a bunch of kids and seeing how many times I could. It was more like an entertainment style. It didn't matter how really good the wrestling was. Then you go to Mexico and it's completely different. And so those are the things that I really enjoyed. And like Canada, for example, is a hybrid of that, right? So Canada really enjoys the wrestling, but also needs a little bit of entertainment like they do in the United States. So yeah, it's been for me a great learning experience, and just from somebody who's just from a small logging town in Washington State, just being able to experience these different cultures has just been amazing. So.
Well, I think it also, it obviously has made you the well-rounded athlete that you are. But you mentioned Japan. That's one of the regions that you can get AEW Plus here on FITE. And we do encourage you, I don't want to just shill the entire time, but we do encourage everyone watching, if you don't have it yet, go right now, FITE.tv, subscribe to AEW Plus. That's where you're going to get Dynamite and Rampage and Dark and anything AEW. You're going to get it right there. If you're in Japan, if you're in the UK, just check your market and see if it's available there. Chances are it is. One of the things that a lot of people have been talking about, you came out, you gave a thank you to your previous employer. You didn't do the traditional, I'm so angry and here I am in this new place. And I was there the night that you debuted in Chicago, and off air, what you said in the ring, it was so refreshing in a way, not to knock anybody who had a negative experience. They're entitled to their feelings and their experience was their own. But knowing that you appreciated where you came from almost carries even more weight that you're now here in AEW. So what was, and I know you've probably said this 1,000 times, but for our viewers here, what was the real deciding factor for you to, after a long storied career, I mean, you couldn't have, in the WWE, you couldn't have gone any higher than where you went, multi-time world champion. What was it that said, okay, AEW, that's where I want to be. That's the next chapter of my career?
Yeah, so I think I was just excited about it, right? Like it scared me a little bit, and that excited me. It was a very difficult decision, and I actually think it speaks volumes for AEW that I even left, because I loved where I worked before, and I loved the people there and all that kind of stuff. And so, but one of the things was, and I kind of see these last. I don't want to call them the last, because I want to wrestle for a long, long time. But probably not at the level that I can now. I feel like these next 3 years are going to be kind of like the last years where I can go like really hard every match. And I wanted to be able to do it in a place that is more wrestling focused, the way AEW is. Like I would watch the shows, and I would see guys like Kenny Omega, right? And the matches that they'd be having, and I'd be like, whoa. So they'd get a lot of longer matches. They'd get a lot of more intense matches. The focus is more on the wrestling than, for example, on the backstage stories or whatever it is. And there's obviously this. It's all wrestling is story driven, but our stories are told. AEW stories are told more in ring, that sort of thing, and that's the kind of thing that I really love, and I really wanted to be able to do that at the highest level. And these last 3 years, not only do I think are the kind of the last where I can go super hard, I consider these like the apex, like the climax of my career, as opposed to like, okay, I'm going to be tapering off. I think now I'm the best version of myself possible, and I wanted to be able to do that with absolute, complete physical freedom. So,
how incredible is it for you personally? You talk about having the absolute physical freedom and being able to go, hard on every single match of these next 3 years, hopefully. But just a handful of years ago, and one of the things I love about it is that referee Aubrey Edwards was in the crowd when shedding a tear or two, as were many, many people. But I mean, you rewind just a few years, and your career was over. It was done, and again, it was a storied career at that point. Had it stopped from a fan standpoint, we all would have looked at it and said, okay, it was too soon, but man, what more could he have done? And now we got the answer of what more you could have done, right? So you're back, you're doing all of this now, and you're at the highest level. You said you're at the best. How does that feel for you personally? Just when you go out, when you walk out a place like, and we're going to talk about your match with Kenny Omega at Arthur Ashe Stadium, when you walked out there, obviously you've been back for a number of years, but to just look at it and say, hey, it's 2021, here I am, however many years ago, I was done, and now look at this. Now look at what I'm able to be doing. I mean, that's got to be incredible.
Yeah, and so it is, and it's weird because ever since I was cleared to come back after I was forced to retire, I've had this kind of sense of gratitude with, like, it almost seems like a gift. Like everything else now is just a gift. So the last time I wrestled in Philadelphia was actually shortly before the pandemic. And I wrestled Drew Gulak, who's from Philadelphia, at the Elimination Chamber. And we wrestled like a really non-WWE style match. Yeah. And I was so, like, the ability to just be able to go and do that just filled me with such gratitude. And then you get things like at All Out when I first debuted with AEW, and the crowd reaction there is insane. And then 20,000 people at Arthur Ashe against Kenny Omega. And it's really incredible because even as I talk about it now, I get kind of chills because those experiences are so incredible. I think, as somebody who's also been like a fan and sat there for incredible matches while not being a part of them, I think that there's just a unique energy within professional wrestling that's like when something is super awesome and it's really hot, it's unlike anything else. And that energy goes throughout the entire arena. Like people just feel it. And like in the ring, you're the center of it. And the feeling of it is just unlike anything else. So
it's, you're talking about that energy. And so I had the opportunity because I work for FITE and there to promote AEW Plus, which again, right here at FITE.tv for all your AEW needs. But I mentioned that I was in Chicago when you debuted, but I also had the opportunity to be in New York at Arthur Ashe Stadium. And I wanted to ask you what it was like for you. Obviously you're the center of that, but it was in that building, in that moment, when your music hit, when you were coming to the ring, it was, you always hear someone say, it's deafening in here, right? It was the closest to deafening that I had ever experienced. It was so loud that the noise, to me, to describe it, became like one solid like sound, just one combined sound all at once to the point where there's almost no sound. It was so loud. What did that feel like for you? I know that's kind of a strange question, hard to kind of articulate necessarily, but I know what it felt like to me to just be standing there in the midst of the crowd. I can't imagine what that must feel like for you.
Yeah, I think it's very similar. I think one of the things that you pointed out, is that it's hard to articulate feeling, and that and amplification of feeling is especially hard to articulate, as far as like, okay, what's the difference between a 7 out of 10 on a joy scale and a
Right.
9 out of 10 on a joy scale? It's just amplification, right?
Mhm.
And so yeah, that's really all it is. But the the amplification process is so memorable, and I think that's one of the hard. That was when I fell into a pretty deep depression when I was forced to retire, because I think wrestling, it's just, normally a very low key person, right? I don't put myself in high energy situations because I don't enjoy necessarily frenetic energy. Like in
Mhm.
busy cities, that's hard for me. Like I prefer to be in a small town. I rather than be at a party, I would rather be in a small gathering of friends,
Mhm.
right? Where the discussion can sometimes get boisterous, but not too boisterous,
Right.
right? Because then it's like, it's that's hard on me. But so then the fact that I enjoy wrestling so much, and that it gives you that kind of visceral energy that I don't have anywhere else in my life, as far as that, the amplification that we're talking about. So yeah, I mean, uh, I I don't know if it was it's hard to say like what's the greatest experience of your career. It
Right.
felt like the match against Kenny Omega in Arthur Ashe with all that energy felt like either the greatest or one of the greatest moments of my career.
It's interesting you say that. I know Jim Ross got a little flack on the internet for saying that that night was possibly the greatest night of his career, greatest experience in his career. And, anybody who listens to Jim's podcast enjoys hearing him kind of talk about the negative feedback he gets on those things. But he articulated very well why he felt that way. And, it's easy for us fans to sit back and say, oh, well, this was the biggest moment because there were more people in the crowd, or because we remember it made us feel a certain way. But I think it speaks to what AEW is doing. It speaks to what you're doing now, that an atmosphere like that could exist for you, for somebody like yourself, someone like a Jim Ross, who have been to the highest of highs in this business, to still be able to have something new that is resonating with you in that way. And I think that is part of what is making AEW such a success, and what's allowing it to grow. Of course, there is a great international fan base, and again, I'm going to plug it, AEW Plus. It's where you need to be. I'm excited to be in Philadelphia, hopefully encouraging anyone who is not tuned into AEW Plus to tune in. I want to know, in your opinion, why do you think, we talked about the differences in the different regions. Why do you think AEW, as we've seen its success grow in the United States, and we've seen, the ratings have increased significantly. We've seen the excitement in all of these events grow and grow and grow. But internationally, it has gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. Why do you think that AEW, what is it about AEW that speaks to all of these different areas of the world?
So one of the things that I think AEW and Tony Khan has done very well is get people that do different styles, right? So you have, and also like the characters are vast, and how they present themselves are all completely different,
Right.
right? Orange Cassidy is 100% different than Bryan Danielson.
Yeah.
And how CM Punk is approaching it is very different from what I'm doing. And how MJF does it is more like an old school vibe. You get all these different things. And I think they also bring in a lot of international talent, which is also, it's not like they don't try to create an international talent from scratch. So, for example,
Mhm.
obviously, Penta and Ray Phoenix are just incredible,
Oh, yeah.
right? Just incredible. But it wasn't a rebranding of them. It was
Sure.
not, it wasn't, here are these excellent wrestlers from Mexico, and we're going to bring them in, and we're going to create our own character out of these amazing wrestlers, and then try to build that from scratch. They were taking them as they were. Like, hey, these guys are stars, and we're gonna bring these stars to AEW. And I think that's the same thing. You see it a lot with Japan, both the Japanese wrestlers, both on the men's side and the women's side. Like, hey, there wasn't a huge introduction for Minoru Suzuki as far as like telling people who he was. They just trust that a portion of their fans know who Minoru Suzuki is, and the ones that don't, he's going to be so awesome that they're just going to be like, yeah, this dude's rad. So I think that's one of the reasons why, to me, and especially going forward, the bigger AEW gets and the more exposure, because everything is just like a time thing, right? As far as like it takes time to get into these markets. But once the markets see it and they're like, whoa, they're presenting a lot of different things, and this really appeals to me. Or, oh, they're taking stars like, oh, I know who Penta is. I know who Yuji Nagata is. I know who these different people are. And they're bringing them in as they are, as the fans know them. And I think that's it's a testament to what AEW has done as far as like their mentality for that. But I think that's really appealing to the international fan base.
So I have a couple of questions for you that are really more just me looking at it saying, as I have to sometimes remember stats or remember names or whatever it is. So obviously, when you joined the WWE, you changed your name. You flipped your name a bit. Mm-hmm. I interviewed somebody at Arthur Ashe Stadium, a fan, and said, what are you most excited about with the event? And you could tell in her head, she was like, don't get this wrong. Don't get this wrong. And she said, I can't wait to see Daniel Bryanson.
Yeah.
And I felt so bad for her, and the internet had a little fun with it. But I told her afterwards, she's like, oh, I can't believe it. I'm like, listen, you have no idea how much that's going in my head. And I think everybody else is trying to say this because like, I've been a fan of yours for back in the Ring of Honor days. And, it took a long time to wrap my head around Daniel Bryan, right?
Yeah.
And now we have to go back to it. So I have two questions for you. One, I mean, for you, I don't know how challenging it is, but how often would you say since going to AEW have people messed up your name?
I don't think it's been that often because a lot of the people that I know in AEW knew me before. Like I've known them before I was Daniel Bryan.
Okay.
But you have to realize that it ended up being, although I came into WWE as this like, hey, this guy who was from the independents, I was in WWE longer than I was on the independents before. So I was on the independents for 10 years, and then I came to WWE and was there for 11, right? Wow. And so it's just one of those things where I completely understand it. But I think as a wrestler, it's really funny because you get used to being called the weirdest names, right? Yeah. Like because even when I first started, people weren't calling me Bryan Danielson; they were calling me Dragon. So like I would be in the grocery store with somebody, and say like they're calling me and they're, hey Dragon, hey, do you want some of this? And there is no weird thing of being like, hey, this dude's calling. You're used to it. Right. Oh yeah, sure, I'll take that or whatever it is. You know what I mean? And so for me, I don't even realize, but some people, they just know me as Daniel Bryan. They were never introduced to Bryan Danielson. So I think and because they're so close and because I think it's really hard for people. It was really hard for people to adjust in WWE who'd known me for a long time before. Mm-hmm. Like, I remember specifically like CM Punk was on commentary for one of my matches. It might've been like, when I was first in NXT or whatever, but he was on commentary and he could not for the life of him say Daniel Bryan. So it's just like, it happened. It's going to happen.
So the other one is, I read on the internet, which means it has to be true, but that you were, out of respect to the WWE, you were not going to attempt to do the yes chant yourself. Obviously, the crowd's going to do what they're going to do. But I've noticed that, when you come to the ring, you have the open hands and your arms are out and everything. Has that been something after years and years and years of coming to the ring with the fingers going up for the yes chant? is that something that you kind of have to consciously tell yourself, like, do not do it? You're going up on the ropes. Do not do those fingers going up.
No, so it doesn't. Although it is interesting because I have new music that has kind of like a different beat to it, and then also, but the fans are still doing the yes chants when I come out, and they're not necessarily doing it to the same beat of the music. So then my body gets a little confused as far as like, oh, there's two different beats going on here, and I'm not the most rhythmic guy in the first place, right? And so yeah, I mean, it's not really an issue. Even in WWE, I was the Planet's champion for an extended period of time, and I just stopped doing the yes chants, right? So,
Yeah.
so for me, that's not an issue. But then it does become a thing. Like it's not like I don't instinctively ever think about doing it,
Right.
but it does become a thing of like, oh no, what am I doing with my hands, right? Like, it's a meme. I forget what movie it was on when the guy was talking about it, but it is true. It's like you come out. For me in WWE, the hardest thing, and this was before I started doing the yes chants, the hardest thing is the long, like once I get in the ring, I'm 100% comfortable, 1000% comfortable. But that, when you start walking down a ramp, because on the independents, you didn't really do that. You'd come out through like a door and the people are pretty close. You can literally just walk to the ring and you don't have to do anything special. But when you're on a ramp and you're on a stage and it's like 30 to 45 seconds before you get to the ring, that 30 to 45 seconds feels really uncomfortable if you don't know what you're doing. And so it's like, oh, I've walked to the ring 1,000 times or more, and I've never felt this uncomfortable. So it is just like figuring out, what do you do? And that's why people do those things where they like, part of it is presentation, but, they come out to the stage and they do the whatever they do or, and like that sort of thing. And then they walk to the ring because if you just come out and you do nothing, it feels weird.
You gotta fill some time. You gotta do something.
You gotta fill some time. All these people are looking at me. What do I do?
The last question, then I'll let you go here. And again, I appreciate you taking the time to talk with us here at FITE. Really great to just have this opportunity. We talked off air about how you're one of the few people that I hadn't actually met. And it's nice to finally be able to, I guess, virtually meet you and be able to talk to you here. But my last question is pretty much just, I mentioned a number of times your storied career. You talked about how this is the apex. This is the, of your career right now. But what to you, if someone said, okay, what is your ultimate goal between now and whenever you eventually retire? What is that one last goal you have to accomplish? Do you have that? Is that something on your mind?
No, I mean, I don't have that kind of ambition. Like my ambition is completely different than a lot of ambitions. And I've told this story before. WWE did this personality test for a bunch of their successful wrestlers.
Yeah.
And in it, I got the lowest ambition score the lady had ever seen. On a scale of 0 to 100, it was like 1. Like And so it's like, but I think that's because, in our society, ambition is measured differently. Like they want you to have goals. Like, what is your goal? What do you want to do? Do you want to do this or do you want to do that? I don't think in those terms. One of my goals for myself personally is to become the best wrestler that I can be, as far as like keep improving in different aspects. And there's different, a lot of these things, most fans will never notice. It's just things that are particular to me or things that I enjoy or whatever it is. But then the other thing is to enjoy the experience of doing this thing that I love, because I learned, the hard way that this doesn't, before I was forced to retire, it was almost like I was taking it. You don't respect it in the sense of like, that it can be taken away from you. Right. And so once you have that, then it's just like, oh, okay, this can be taken away from me literally at any time. And it's not up to my discretion. It's like anybody can get hurt on any given night, and it can just go away like that. And then then that becomes, rather than stressing about it, rather than getting nervous before big matches, to enjoy those feelings, to enjoy, like, for example, if you were to ask me, was I nervous before the match with Kenny Omega and Arthur Ashe? And I was putting a lot of pressure on myself as far as like this, it felt like the biggest match of my career. If you ask me if I was nervous, I didn't feel nervous at all. I did feel the butterflies, but I was enjoying the butterflies, right? Like soaking in that, because where else in my life do I get those kind of butterflies? Like, you know, there's, you know, so many people watching all over the world, not to mention the 20,000 people that are in the stadium, not to mention it's the biggest show AEW's done. It's my first match in AEW, not to mention, like, you know, I've been wanting to wrestle Kenny Omega for a long, long time. And so where else are you going to feel those butterflies? And to, rather than being like, oh God, I'm nervous, I'm stressed or whatever, to enjoy feeling that and being like, whoa, this is what excitement feels like. And so that's one of my goals, is to just like enjoy this process. I feel like I've done a very good job the last several years since I've come back from retirement of being able to enjoy moments and without the stress of them. Shawn Michaels, so I was trained by Shawn Michaels, and one of the things he said to us is, he said, the moment you stop feeling nervous before you go out there is the moment you need to retire. And I found that I actually had to retire to come back and not feel that nervousness anymore.
Oh, wow.
And it's made it a more joyful experience, you know, like the wrestling. Now, when I get the butterflies, it's almost like joy. It's like, whoa, feel this excitement. This is like, this is going to be awesome. Like, it's not a nervousness. It's an excitement that this is going to be incredible. So yeah, so as far as like goals, like as far as like, I want to do this or I want to do that, like, I don't have a lot of that, you know. I would like to do, you know, there are some people I'd like to wrestle in AEW, and obviously you'd want them to be incredible matches or whatever it is. Sure. You know, I'd love to be able to go to New Japan and do the G1, you know what I mean? But that's COVID dependent. So I don't hang anything on any of that. If I would love to do something with MJF in AEW. If that doesn't materialize and it never happens, it doesn't matter, right? Like, as long as I enjoy the rest of the things. So
I think that's incredible perspective, and a good way to be. And again, I thank you for taking the time to speak with us here today. Continued success, wishing you nothing but the best in your time in AEW. And I think I speak for all the AEW fans when I say we are just excited to watch and see what happens. Ladies and gentlemen, you can watch him on FITE.tv. Check the availability in your market for AEW Plus. That is where you want to be. FITE.tv, AEW Plus. Bryan Danielson, everybody. Thank you so much.
Or Daniel Bryanson.
Daniel Bryanson. Daniel Bryanson, thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah, thank you.